Tales from Juthos, Part 4. Sat in a booth atop the mezzanine that formed the upper level of the Mountainheart Tavern, Krulleg took a deep swig from his tankard. He sat above the entrance of the building, opposite to the bar on the lower level, and with a good eye on the stage. When the captain had walked in, the two guards which had been doing an exceptionally poor job of shadowing him had presumably slipped around the back door to have words with the establishment's owner. Quite out of the blue, Krulleg had been approached by a particularly terrified-looking barmaid who had offered him service in one of their private event rooms. Krulleg had simply smiled and declined, stating that if it came to that he would prefer a good and honest tavern brawl. He very much wished he'd indulged the two hopefuls now. Krulleg watched the dancers upon the stage, the various patrons whooping and shouting their support. He had seen a dance like this before. It was a festival dance that had been of particular importance to the plainsmen of northern Nubreberg and Mur. That was a long time ago now. The dance was supposed to be a dedication to the winds of Javara, the goddess of liberty. It was typically performed at the changing of the seasons, the shifting air currents bringing an end to the rule of one order and bringing with it the next in a never-ending cycle. The seasonal rebellion against stagnation, an elderly plainsman had once told him, allows those who would know the goddess to flourish, and teaches us the danger of miring ourselves in the old ways. Krulleg couldn't see much of the spirit of rebellion here today. Just the same old tits and dicks, though it was probably just as well. If the men and women on stage were outed as worshipping Javara in earnest, there would be repercussions. This was Mentis' kingdom, after all. Idly, he wondered how it was that they came to be here in Gren. He took another drink from his tankard. He really missed the days he could sit down in a busy tavern and enjoy himself. He looked down at the dancers and tried to make something out of how they were feeling beneath the feathered masks. He wondered what their stories were. He wondered if they missed someone too. Krulleg didn't know how he expected to feel, coming here and irritating an old wound. It didn't feel good. But sometimes that was necessary. Or maybe he just needed to. Yes, perhaps that was it. The smuggler was stirred from his thoughts as a familiar green-cloaked walked into the room with a large-eared, bristly-furred companion in tow. The dockmaster's pet and that... what were they called again? Sea rat keys or something. He'd been warned about these things before. Keen sense of hearing, they said. Keen enough to get any earnest man in trouble. It was loud enough in here with the music and crowd. He decided to put what he'd been told to the test. Under his breath, the captain made a low sound. Ears. Up top. The creature's ears flicked, and he turned around to face the mezzanine, pulling on his companion's cloak as he did so. His eyes narrowed, and within seconds he was staring right at Silden in his booth. Well, bugger me, the captain said to himself, nodding to the creature and taking another drink. These sea rats, or whatever they were, had just soared up his potential threat list. He wondered if their kind had any negative feelings towards a potential career in smuggling. If this was what the port authorities were using now, he'd very much like to get one of his own. The pet and the ears made their way towards the staircase that would lead them up to Silden's level. As they walked, they drew attention here and there among the crowd. Many of the looks darkly amused or mean-spirited. One man shouted something to her that Silden couldn't quite hear, and then both the man and his companions laughed. That was curious. Not taking his eyes off them, the captain finally addressed the barmaid who had been waiting for him for the last 15 minutes. He had figured that the longer she was willing to stand there being ignored, the greater the threat had been which was forcing her to put up with it. Clearly, she was terrified. "If you'd be so kind, a bottle of red and 3 glasses. I'd like to speak to one of them dancers after they're finished too. Just 1 or 2 of them, mind. You can let the guards in the back room know they're welcome too if they wear the same kit, particularly the one with a shaven face. Reckon the feathers would look cute on him." Silden drew his eyes off the approaching pair and looked at the barmaid for a reaction. She didn't know what to think. Good. That meant she'd probably just get on with it. He raised his eyebrows at her in the silence. "Yes, of course, sir," she managed to speak, and then ran off, eyes wide and red of face. Poor thing. Too young to be dealing with this sort of business. Maybe he could find a way to enjoy himself with the guards this evening after all. "Are you Krulug Silden?" came a voice from behind his right shoulder. It was the dockmaster's pet. Without turning, Krulug simply responded, "Depends. Are you looking to make enemies of a man by not showing proper respect to his position?" The woman continued around the edge of the table to face him. The first thing that struck the captain was that she wasn't afraid to move within his arm's reach. She still had her hood up too, unlike the rest of the tavern's patrons. But she was tall, unusually so for a woman, and even with Krulleg's enormous frame, this angle afforded him the details of her face beneath the covering. It was not a healthy-looking face. Not by a long shot. Her eyes were enlarged strangely. Not the wide pupils of intoxication, but rather the irises themselves were so large they removed white from all but the extreme corners when she looked to the side. The muscles in her skin were tense along the left side of her jaw. Striations in the neck highlighting darkened veins, as if she were a recent victim of a spider bite laced with potent venom. Her mouth was open slightly wider than it needed to be, and she could see a tongue working between the slightly too sharp teeth to contain the uncomfortable volume of saliva within. Every now and again, her nose twitched. "Ezra says you're a smuggler and a disgrace to your title. You're no more a captain than any other heretic." The woman's voice was even. She was trying to measure him up. Clearly, she thought she posed some sort of threat. To her side, the sea rat's eyes had widened in a heightening level of panic. "Angie? Sorry, she doesn't make friends easily. I'm sure she meant nothing by it." The creature backed away from Silden as he shifted his weight. But he was only folding his arms to eye up this Angie and stroke the coarse hair of his beard. "Now why would you say something like that? Do you think I haven't backed my words in a tavern before? What about you, girl? Sit down." There was a silence whilst the strange woman flashed her eyes between her cowering companion and then back at Silden. "Oh yeah, you can bring that one too. I likes to see the people who are listening in on me." Krulleg flicked his fingers to the chair as he spoke. "He can't really help it, you know. The Seyrat D have learned not to speak in lies," Angie snapped, then took a seat. "Or get very good at them, I'm sure. Ain't that right?" He eyed the creature as it climbed into the booth. It didn't have much in the way of a snout, coming across as something vaguely cat or otter-like, but unquestionably goblinoid. The fur he had seen on goblin kind once before, but never on something this size. Barely larger than a halfling, it had a slight frame with hair or fur that ran down the back of its body more than the front. His fingers were long and powerful looking, the sinews suggesting he was probably a natural climber. Without a doubt, however, the ears were the main story here. Currently he had them folded away from his face against his back, with their length ending just below the base of his neck. When fully raised, these things easily would be larger than the height of his head. Further, The movements he had made with them since entering the Mountainheart suggested the creature had quite a high level of dexterous control with them. As he nervously seated himself, he caught spy of a monkey-like tail. Not altogether surprising, thought Silden. He'd need a tail to grip onto something with his ears at full sail, or he'd be lost to the winds. "I've ordered us a wine bottle. Hope you don't mind," said the captain. "You want snacks too? Oh, we might just have a visit from a couple of dancers and an angry guard." "Your crewman told us that you fought a winged beast off the deck that turned to ash. Is that right? What did it look like?" This Angie was clearly not in the mood to humour him, but he continued. "The house red here comes from one of the Fashinian vineyards in the west of the region. At least it used to. Made a killing doing runs between there and Rhino. All you have to do is promise better than the regional tax, you see, then they come running." "Silden, I need those details. I'm not paying you." "Big part of smuggling, that is. Learning not to be too greedy. Treat it like a business, you see. Not like you're some big scary bad. No one will talk to you then." "Silden!" Her voice was rising. Her large-eared companion looked between them, concerned. "There are lots of little schemes like that. Helps keep the crew happy when people ain't killing each other. Not that that happens often, mind you, but I reckon there's something to it. If you can't be a good businessman, you've got no life as a criminal. Old friend told me that, and—" Angie stood up and smashed her hands down on the table, drawing looks from nearby. She was breathing heavily, and you could see her fingernails drawing ruts in the table. "Silden, we don't have time for—" Nobody was ever quite prepared for how quick Silden was. People have this funny idea that large and bulky people are necessarily slow. That to appease some cosmic balance, there are rules in place that determine that the more physically imposing someone is, the slower and less dexterous they must necessarily be. People who make this mistake can be to some level forgiven, as it is often true that large and imposing figures often do move slowly compared to those who are slight of frame. This is not because they are lumbering oafs. It is because they are confident. In a flash, Silden was on his feet, and a huge hand had knocked this whatever she was sprawling in her seat. Drawn to his full height, he towered over this woman, who was clearly taken aback by his ferocity. The large-eared sea-rat thing jumped away from the booth in fright. "Now listen you here, little missy. You're going to settle down, and you're going to listen to the captain talk for a moment." The woman thing's eyes were wild. A clawed hand flashed towards his wrist. Silden caught it, pulled her in, and slammed her head into the table, facing the rest of the bar. Her arm locked behind her back. "You're going to start a ruckus, are you? In front of all these good people? Try it again, and that'll be it." Silden waited for her to stop struggling. Curiously, the rat thing wasn't looking at the captain anymore. He was looking at Angie. "Come on, Angie. Angie, come back," he pleaded. The woman squirmed under Silden's grasp. Was she getting stronger? "Angie, Angie, please," came the thing's voice again. The woman's voice came in a snap. It sounded different, slightly deeper, and with more force. I know, Dogan. Get your hands off me." This was all the captain needed to hear. He looked between the sea rat and this woman thing, and shook his head. "Right, pet, I should have known." He twisted her arm and applied more pressure to her neck. "What are you doing?" shouted this Dogan. "Now you, wait up, you'll get your turn. Hell beast comes out of the dark and attacks my men. A devil of all things, yeah, that's right, I know what it was. I asked your dear dockmaster if she knows anything about these beasts, and she says she has an expert. Well, fancy that." Beneath his hands, he could feel the woman's arms growing longer, her face contorting. "An expert on devils, are you? Well, I says you don't look to me like no priest. What is it then? The Dark Master summon you? One of her cronies did it? Fancied you'd come and pick off my crew so your cursed king needn't pay his dues? We're just smugglers, ain't we? Pet! The scene was causing a panic in the rest of the bar, as was the contorting figure beneath Silden's hands. People were looking up, shouting. The performance on stage, along with its music, had stopped. From the back room, 2 guards, one of which wearing less clothes and more feathers than the other, came running out with partisans in hand. Her claws were getting longer. This was going to get messy. Returning from the bar, a frightened barmaid holding 3 glasses with one hand threw a bottle of red at the captain with the other. The window behind him smashed as he ducked beneath the impact, sending a chill wind through the tavern from the tunnels outside. Yet then, the wind kept going. Silden looked down at the devil woman on the table. She was growing fur now. The lamps within the room flickered in the still blowing wind. The intensity of the gust moving past the captain had caused those close by to take a few steps back and shield their eyes to avoid the debris of broken glass. "This one? Really?" muttered Silden beneath his breath. The lamps, and then the tavern, went dark. In the confusion, the heavy thud of a giant man piling his fist into the jaw of a she-devil could be heard, followed by a loud slam and cries of alarm as he pulled himself over the handrail of the mezzanine and landed hard on the ground floor.